Anyone else feel like they're living in the twilight zone? And that it's just getting more and more bizarre. Well, there is an explanation for that. We are living through an apocalypse. No, not the apocalypse, as is an end-of-the-world disaster, but a literal apocalypse nonetheless. And let me explain. The word apocalypse is Greek for revelation. As Mary Pizzullo writes in an article this week in Pathos.com entitled George Floyd and the American Apocalypse. An apocalypse is a lifting of the veil, a dropping of the mask, a making known of something that you could not have known before. And that's why the New Testament book of Revelation is also commonly known as the Apocalypse of John. In other words, the revelation to John. And in the past few months, and accelerating day by day, our country is finally opening its eyes to some things that it hadn't known before, or perhaps more accurately, have chosen not to acknowledge. Pizzullo states, in an all too common experience, one that I find especially true for those of us who are baby boomers, she writes, when I was a little girl, I was raised to believe certain things. That the police are heroes who help people and only hurt the bad guys. That racism used to exist in America, but only in the South and only until about 1970. And now that's over. That America was the best place to live in the world and the only place where everyone is truly free. And that misfortune is usually the unfortunate person's fault, because life is generally just and people wind up with the life that they work for. The things she was raised to believe, as she mentions, came primarily from being in a privileged class, economically and racially, middle class and white. Now, all of those long-held beliefs are not only being challenged, but the revelation, the apocalypse, is that these and so many other things are either blatantly untrue or not the experience of everyone living in this country. A couple of months ago, it was revealed that people of color, particularly the black community, were disproportionately affected by the spread of the coronavirus. And many wondered why this was the case. Well, the answer was based in issues dealing with economics and access to health care. The veil had been lifted. The brutal murder of George Floyd has led to the revelation, the apocalypse, that police brutality is not simply the case of one bad apple in law enforcement. In fact, the very opposite has been proven, given the military-style tactics inflicted upon mostly peaceful protesters around the country in the past few weeks. Yes, the veil has been lifted. And those of us who are in the white majority in America are finally coming to understand what systemic racism really means and looks like. And that it does exist, and always has, within the systems of which this country was built. I forgot who said it, but in reflecting upon the disproportionate number of blacks in the prison judicial system in our country, he stated that the solution is not to fix a broken system. In fact, he states, the system is working exactly as as it has been set up to work. Therefore, it's not about fixing. It's about changing, perhaps to the point of dismantling and rebuilding. And that is the philosophy that is behind the current defund the police movement. Reforming the current system of law enforcement is not enough. We have been doing that for 50 years. And look where that's gotten us. Better, but far from good. And Christian activist and author John Pavlovitz encourages us to build a bigger table where all can find a seat. Well, after the events of the past month, however, perhaps the most effective approach is to create and build an entirely new table together. Creating a new table involves not just inviting others to join us at our table, but rather to create a new table by listening deeply to those from other cultures, and especially to those who are oppressed and despised because of their race and difference. And the very essence of that means those of us who are white need to stop talking for a while and assuming that we will control the outcome. Rather, we need to start listening empathetically to the real life experiences of others. Now, I'm not making any proposals here. I'm simply stating that the veil has been lifted. A crack has appeared and it's growing. And the cause for true justice demands radical change in hearts and minds as well as in practice. One response, however, is the option to continue to close our eyes or retreat into a state of denial, including the assumption that we ourselves certainly can't be part of the problem. But that option would take a lot of mental gymnastics, because it is now completely ludicrous to deny that something is terribly wrong. But for those of us who have experienced a revelation, an apocalypse with the lifting of the veil, and especially for those of us who are people of faith, seeking to follow the ways and teachings of Jesus, closing our eyes and retreating into denial is not a faithful response. As many are stating in these recent days, it's not enough to not be racist. We have to be actively anti-racist. And that involves the hard work of looking inward and educating ourselves into what being actively anti-racist means and what it entails. For instance, I do not consider myself a white supremacist. Yet it has been revealed apocalyptically that dismantling white supremacy begins within myself. For this sense of being better than has been ingrained in me socially since the day I was born. The Rev Steven Ticknor, in a recent article in progressivechristianity.org, reflects upon this from his own white upbringing. The messages of superiority were reinforced, he writes, quote, from what I saw on television, to how I was taught history, to never having a teacher of color until I went to college. Well, as for me, growing up in an all-white suburb of Chicago in the 1960s, and then in South Dakota in the early 1970s, that included never having a black person in any classroom until high school when the family moved to Dallas. The revelation The apocalypse that we are currently experiencing is the realization that our society is dangerous for non-white people in the United States. So the whole point of being actively anti-racist is to be active. The stated clerk of the PCUSA General Assembly, the Reverend Dr. J Herbert Nelson II, a black man, sent a letter out to the entire Presbyterian denomination stating, "No longer can we hide behind not being controversial. We are all caught in this quagmire now." You know, that's actually a shocking statement, because almost all preachers, while perhaps being prophetic, still shy away from being controversial. And Nelson continues, "We are waiting for answers from old sources that we have depended on for so long. But how deep is our faith? How deep is our commitment to get into places that we aren't familiar with and proclaim the gospel? The church is called to dismantle structures that put people in poverty and pain, to not only share the gospel, but, he says, to share ourselves." Share ourselves? Get personally involved? That scares the dickens out of us. What if we say something wrong? What if we don't do the right thing? What if others oppose us in our work for justice and equality? Well, it's all but guaranteed that that will happen. We will make mistakes. But the key is to have the courage and strength to stay involved. Nelson adds, "We're in a very difficult period of history right now, and I'm not sure we're ever going to go back. This is a time of significant transition. We are being called even though we don't know the way, to engage even though we don't have all the answers. We find ourselves in a metamorphosis of change that we did not choose, but we have to engage it." And he closes by affirming those individuals and Presbyterian congregations and others who are, quote, "catching the wind and the wave of this current hour, for getting out front and being part of the leadership." Well, that's a calling that I have discerned that God has put upon my own heart in the midst of this apocalypse. And as a pastor, I'm discerning that College Hill itself is being called to speak out, to take action, and to work for the structural change necessary to live into what Jesus means when he commands us to love our neighbors. So how can we as a community move into this work together? And in the process, what do we do with our righteous anger? Well, Gandhi wrote, "I have learned to use my anger for good. Without it, we would not be motivated to rise to a challenge. It is an energy that compels us to find what is just and what is unjust." Well, without devolving into pointing fingers toward those that we believe are right and those we believe are wrong, I believe it is the movement of the Spirit of God with and within us, truly revealing to us what is just and what is unjust. And one of the things we've learned is that it's not just about resistance, as important as that is. It also involves the recognition of the deep-seated grief, the grief of the black people who are experiencing in this aftermath of continued brutality and death. So in whatever path we choose to follow in taking action, whether as individuals or as a community of faith, let us recognize and heed those words of Jesus. See, I am sending you out like sheep into the midst of wolves. So be wise as serpents and innocent as doves. Amen. Let us continue in a moment of prayer. Loving and gracious God, it seems that every week we start by mentioning how tough it is to live in these troubling times. And it seems to be only increasing from day to day, from week to week, especially with the upcoming visit of the President of the United States to our city, which many do indeed perceive as intentionally divisive. May those of us who will be out protesting for peace and for a recognition that Black Lives Matter, and that we will not be threatened by white supremacy, that we may be peaceful, that we may make a difference, that we may use this as an opportunity to put our faith into action. And yes, when needed, to be controversial. Dear God, we are a nation in need of deep, deep healing. Pray for reconciliation, but as mentioned in other prayers, reconciliation means going back to a time when things were good. And we are truly understanding that for so many people in this country, especially the Black community, things were never good. So help us to learn to be in relationship, to face the own sense of white supremacy of which we have all but subconsciously been raised in ourselves. And that's tough work. And it's not about guilt and pointing a finger. It's about coming to realize who we truly are, but also who you have created us to be, and how to be in relationship with others so that we can truly say that we are seeking to love our neighbors. Be with continued medical profession and those that are continuing to be diagnosed with COVID-19. Things are not getting better on that front either. So give us the patience to keep socially distanced, or physically distanced, as we socially try to stay connected. Be with those who are in need of physical healing and emotional healing and spiritual healing. Let us know your very real presence among us, beyond us, and within us. The harvest is great. God sends us out to live into the ways and teachings of Jesus. And the Spirit guides our mission and empowers our ministry. So wherever you may be this day and this coming week, know that wherever you are, that God goes before you to lead you in the way. That God goes behind you to encourage you. That God goes above you to bless you. That God goes beneath you to support you. That God goes beside you to befriend you. And that God goes within you to empower you to live your life to the glory of God, our Creator, Redeemer, and Sustainer, now and forevermore.